normally they would say it applies to your behavior, and of course it does apply to your behavior. But for your behavior to get out of control, your attention has to get out of control. Because basically attention is the way you can control your behavior and the way you modulate your behavior. So, on the one hand, we have these conditions. All of the conditions, all the major conditions that we're talking about today, OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder on the one hand, but substance abuse and certainly alcoholism have been very well studied in this way, have genetic components. So there are aspects of your inherited biology that manifest themselves via your brain that have effects on how difficult it is and the sorts of things that you're vulnerable to in terms of focusing your attention.
Okay, you want to turn half the lights on again? Here's the big point. Did you get it from Dr. Schwartz? Pay attention to what your brain is doing. A person's brain can have a lot of impact on what a person is paying attention to. So what your behavior comes from what you're paying attention to is what he's saying. So look at what you're paying attention to. Are you paying attention to the wrong things? You know, if you are, you need to change that and pay attention to the edifying things, the things that can turn around your brain. He said, why do I get fixated on things that I want to be fixated on? And people who have addictive behaviors often, I think what he was saying is they more easily get fixated on things that aren't good for them. But the big thing is a behavior is a result of attention. When your behavior gets out of control, it's because your attention is out of control. Reminds you of a lot of verses in the Bible, doesn't it? Yeah. So we have to guard our brains and pay attention to what they're paying attention to. Now, here's another behavioral aspect of the brain. This is another very kind man, Dr. Paul Hagstrom. He's a PhD doctor. He wrote, his book is Broken Children, Grown Up Pain, Understanding the Effects of Your Wounded Past. And there's a link to his website. Here's his story. He was, when he was about 8 years old, he went to his mom and said, little Johnny down the street was molested, and that was about as far as he got. He was the son of pastors, and his mom washed his mouth out with soap and said, don't ever mention that again, don't ever mention sex again, and don't ever go play with little Johnny again because he's damaged. Okay? So, obviously that was very wounding and it affected him. And then when he got into high school, the first day in high school, a teacher's assistant took him into the dark room, you know, the way they used to have to develop photographs, and molested him, and that molestation went on. Well, he became a Jekyll and Hyde person because, you know, he didn't know how to deal with all that, and he didn't have anybody to talk to about it. And so at home he was this wonderful, perfect son, did everything right, you know, but at school he was getting in trouble and fighting with people and always having a bad time. And some of the parents of those kids that he went to school with came to his mom and said she just didn't believe him, that he acted that way because she'd never seen it, you know. So when he was 19, he married this 17-year-old girl, and he just thought she was going to accept him and everything would be fine. But right after they got married, he started abusing her physically and sexually and emotionally. And it was, and he'd just leave. They had 2 kids, and he'd just leave because he couldn't deal with those responsibilities, and he'd take up with other women, and she put up with him for 16 years. She stayed with him, and it was one of those situations, you guys probably know, that she felt like there must be something wrong with her that was making him be that way, because she had grown up in a family where she was close to her dad and her brother was close to her mom, and her brother was always picking on her and doing mean things to her, and she'd tell her mom, and her mom would take her brother's side, and her dad was sympathetic to her, but so she'd come from that background, so it was like she was used to abuse. And they were always moving. They even wound up taking a pastorate because Dr. Paul had felt like he was going to be a pastor when he was a child, but didn't help any. I mean, things got worse, and the children were going home to their parents. The children in the church were going home to their parents saying that Pastor Paul and his wife were fighting all the time, So they moved again, and Judy is his wife's name. The stuff was sitting around the new place they had moved into, and one of the kids said, "Mom, aren't you going to unpack?" And she says, "Well, I don't really feel like it because we may be moving again soon," because that's what they did. But she started opening up one of the boxes, thinking it was stuff she needed to put away, and she found this paper that said Hegstrom versus Hegstrom, uncontested divorce. And he divorced her and hadn't even told her. Yeah. So she left him then, and that time, anyway, he took up with another woman, and he abused her so badly physically, that he was facing charges of attempted murder. And he knew if he went to jail what would happen to him there, because of all his history of sexual molestation. So, kind of was a wake-up call. He didn't want to go to prison, so he got into a rehabilitation program. And that was the deal. If he went into a rehab program, this lady wouldn't press charges. So that's what they did. And he went through this rehabilitation program, and I mean, he just realized in that program what had happened to him, and he started doing more research. And here's what he finds out that happens to people that have been abused, whether it's from rejection, incest, molestation, emotional abuse, or physical abuse. It leads to arrested development. The emotions freeze up at the time of wounding, and they lock up. And so this child is stressed totally. All the time, a child is stressed. But physically, they grow into an adult, but not emotionally. So during a time of stress, they act like a child. Here's what happens with the brain. The child's brain has very little serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine, which are the brain neurotransmitters, those chemicals that feed the gap between the nerve endings, so the chemicals take the message across. So children don't think concretely, right? You guys know that. You guys that have taught kids or had kids, it was like, I teach the 2 to 5-year-olds at church once a month. And we were doing this little project. We were drawing around our hands, and then we were going to cut it out and glue it to this little headband, So I was giving the kids instructions, and I said, now when you cut out your hand, and this little girl says, will it hurt? It's just like, they think so concretely. I mean, she wasn't really worried, she was just wondering. They also don't recognize danger. You know, I told my little grandson, I'm here to keep you alive until you can realize you're in danger. And they're very impulsive. They'll chase a ball out into the street without looking, right? Okay. So, at puberty, about age 8 to 9, the pituitary starts producing serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine. And in healthy brain development, an adolescent, as they mature into the teenage years, can start making their own decisions. You know, my husband was very good at knowing when our daughters were ready, were responsible enough to make certain decisions on their own. And they knew they had to live up to that responsibility.
I like teaching Sunday school in that age group of 8 to 10 years old because they pattern their whole life is patterned at that time.
Yes, that's a wonderful time to teach them, 8 to 9 years old. Mm-hmm. Okay, but here's what happened to the wounded child. The brain chemicals are blocked. They may produce them, but they don't have an effect on the brain cells. So they grow physically, but not emotionally, and their emotions are arrested and stuck. It's probably because they're under constant stress, always putting out adrenaline, and it blocks the brain cells from receiving the other neurotransmitters. So the wounded adult acts like a child when stressed, and they recognize this a lot of times, and they feel really uncomfortable even though they can't act like adults. They know it, and they don't have impulsive control. You know, a lot of times they drink or gamble or race fast cars, things like that. They escape. It's okay to race cars fast. You don't have to.
Well, that's good.
I'm just saying they kind of live on the
Yeah,
edge. They
I know
need that
what you mean.
adrenaline
For
rush.
miles.
Yeah. They escape from the reality of life by distractions and addictions. So they develop a pseudo-personality to cope in an adult world. A lot of times they're Jekyll and Hyde, like Dr. Paul was, you know, has this outward appearance of being this wonderful person, and they really want people to think good about them, good things about them. They really put that out there to the general public, but often in the home it's like they're the bad guy, you know. And they are the bad guy. They have that dual personality, that double-minded man found in Scripture, and a lot of times, you know, everybody in the church thinks they're wonderful, but at home they're not. So here's some characteristics again of a wounded adult. They're immature, lack impulse controls, they lack limits, unstable, unable to resolve issues. They're desperate for freedom. They want to be free, but they're often very resistant of authority. They're unhappy with their jobs, and this is a biggie, they blame others. It's never their fault. They always blame somebody else. How many of you guys know a person like that? Most of us have had contact with somebody like that. Yeah, and you know, it's interesting. It really helped, this study really helped me. This is Dr. Paul's little book up here if you guys want to take a look. It's an easy read. But he explains all of this in his book. Because I had known somebody like that, and I thought, there were times I thought, he sure acts like an adolescent, you know. But this just, you know, it helped me have more understanding and compassion for that person, to know what they were having to deal with. And, you know, a lot of this is so subconscious with them. A lot of times they have buried whatever wounded them, which is another problem, because if they don't recognize, if they don't, you know, you don't have to go back and go through all your past, but somehow you have to learn to deal with it to be healed. And I think that's one reason that it's important for all of you to know this, because chances are you could very well be working with these kind of people, because there are a lot of children that have had emotional wounds. Now, a wounded woman tends to have magical thoughts in relationships. I guess that means she romanticizes a lot and thinks her white knight's going to save her, but she looks for the bad boys for some reason. And then she tries to manipulate the man to meet her needs, but she can't really identify her needs. Again, it's very subconscious. The wounding may be very subconscious. And so she doesn't really know what's bothering her, so she can't express it. But she expresses wants, which are often childish and self-centered. A wounded man he feels successful at handling money. He always handles the money, and a lot of times just will not give the woman money to work with. In fact, that's what Dr. Paul did. He would go to Judy's place of work and get her check and go deposit it and then, you know, use it on frivolous stuff, and she wouldn't have anything to buy groceries with. He often expresses his emotions sexually. He's seldom gentle, though. He uses the woman to rid himself of pent-up emotions. And he often has anger, rage, manipulation, power, and control. Those are big issues. Control are big issues. They want to control everyone else, and in the family, they use control as a method, which we know doesn't work very well. And they're childish themselves. They often create the problem and then blame the kids and the wife for the problem when they're the one that's creating the turmoil, that's creating the stress in the family, that's making everybody else cry or act out or whatever it is. But here's the hope, and here's what Dr. Paul came up with. He teaches them how today's behaviors are rooted in childhood wounds. And then they restart the brain development so that the body decreases the adrenaline and the brain can heal. This can be turned around. So here's what they say at his center. If you're teachable, it's fixable. That's the first thing. People have to be willing to be teachable, and often they are not when they're in this brain situation with arrested emotional development. So it can sometimes take a major crisis for them to want to be teachable, like it was with Dr. Paul. You know, he didn't want to go to prison. That's what made him teachable. And they also have to, again, learn to not believe the lie. They feel defective, dirty, damaged, and different. They feel that way. So the life skills program is learning to live, learning to love. So the healing process for a couple. Now that's very interesting. So Dr. Paul went through all this therapy and then, you know, got into his studies, and he reconnected with his wife. I think it was like 8 years later. They had been married 16 years when he divorced her, and they got together on what would have been their 23rd year together if they'd stayed together. So you know, it wasn't like nothing happened right away. Their relationship had to grow and build again, and they had to building trust took a long, long time. But once they did that, they had, you know, a relationship like they never had before. It was a wonderful relationship. And they both worked together in this life skills training program. So, so people have to come out of denial, and 98% of problems like this stem from issues before they're 9 years old. And I know some of the statistics say in divorces, at least one member of the couple was molested as a child. And so they have they can't solve problems when they come up because they're stuck in that childhood mode. So here's another reason to to understand these, if you see those qualities, I mean, you can be very attracted to a person like that because they're Mr. Wonderful or Mrs. Wonderful. That's how they bring themselves across. But I think they're little hints, you know, when you're going together, sometimes if they're too perfect or they're always blaming somebody else for the problems, that can come up. Or, you know, if they seem pretty controlling, those kind of issues need to be dealt with before you get married. Yeah, but it's hard to see them if you don't understand, if you have never heard about this problem. So then they have them discover where their flaws and mindsets are in the dating area. This is even working with married couples. And then they discover relationship patterns which repeat themselves so they can get them out of that vicious cycle. So in life skills, they learn why they do the things they do, and then they're able to focus on healing their wounds and changing their behaviors. They then begin to grow, mature, develop true character, and develop healthy relationships. The person comes out the way God designed them to be. You know, they get back on their divine path. So it helps them unlock their full potential in any area of their lives. And some of these cycles go on in families from generation to generation. Because remember I was telling you about those unresolved emotional conflicts that get stuck in your nervous system? They're not always your unresolved emotional conflicts. You can take them on from somebody else, even in utero. And in the womb, you can take on unresolved emotional conflicts from the people around you. So I think it's just, in a lot of ways, you know, those generational things that are handed down because of what's modeled to you and how you're treated. Because if you have an angry dad, that's the way you learn to react, and you get that anger stuck in you, and then when you get frustrated, that's how it comes out, because it's not only stuck in your nervous system, but it's your model. And so intervening can break those old generational patterns. And the other thing is from the work Dr. Daniel did with the SPECT scans. You know, we in a family, we have the same lifestyle. We eat the same way. You know, we eat foods that don't serve the brain well. That can get a lot of the same relationship patterns going. So you know, it all works together, guys. Okay, well, let's look at Dr. Paul and see what he has to say. Do you want to hit the light?
Over the years in our research, and we've developed much original research in the life skills program, such as the mother-son, the father-daughter, the approach of neuroscience that we're dealing with and will be dealing with today. And God really led me down a path in this area of the spoken word. The Torah tells us that sound is the energy of God. That's important. Sound is the energy of God. I still think that in every human being, and this is just my opinion, so we'll leave it at that, but in every human being, there's something there of God's language that we can develop. Ephesians 4, Paul tells us we've been babies long enough. It's time to come to full stature and grow up. The brain will not rewire if the limbic system or the thalamus is in control. And if we do what the Scripture tells us to do, and that's come to full stature, it takes the shift from the limbic system pushing up and causing reactive behavior to me maturing so that I choose and our choices are in the frontal lobe. And that's basically where the conscience lies. The frontal lobe carries the conscience, And the frontal lobe is where we make choices. I could stand up and do a seminar almost as well as I'm doing this one. And so the brain started to rewire. Now, I want to kind of clarify something for you. In the Word talks so much about the heart. And what I found out in research is so exciting, I can hardly contain myself, because the heart and the brain are totally tied together. So when the scripture talks about your heart, it is your literal heart connected to your brain. It's like one whole unit. What they have found in dissecting hearts is that the heart has axons, dendrites, synapse, and the heart is tied directly to the brain. Directly to the brain. See, God's principles work wonderfully. Wonderfully. And yet the secular world is afraid to use the Word of God. The very Word that programs our thalamus, the very Word that brings healing, the very Word that brings change, the very Word that brings the brain to be able to rewire itself, and we can walk in victory for the rest of our lives. That very Word has been pushed out in the educational systems, in the secular world, and they can't figure out why the prisons are full, and why we're spending millions upon millions and millions of dollars to maintain prison systems, because they can't seem to get hurting people well.
Okay, you want to turn the light on again, please? That video reminded me that, yes, he developed a lot of what he learned from using the scriptures, and he uses the scriptures in healing. And they just kind of touched on that thing about our bodies respond to what we say. Our cells are amazing. It's like they communicate with one another, you know. So if we're speaking negatively, like even things like, you know, I always get this headache, it's like the body says, okay, you have a headache. Yeah, I'll agree with you, you have a headache. So it's another thing. It's good to read scriptures out loud so that your cells hear it. Not just read it silently, but read it out loud. It will reprogram you. It's also good to talk in those positive statements we talked about, because your body will respond. Your cells will respond. They're very in tune with what we say, which could be good or bad. And I've noticed some people just love to tell you about everything that's horrible with them, you know. They're some of the sickest people around. And we have worked with some of them so hard to get them to change their language, but so far it hasn't worked.